So these had been a little bit more around being happy. So most of this learning which I mentioned about was around when I started trying to learn about happiness, and I also shared how I implemented, how I attempt to try some of those in terms of my life. The next part is slightly around um, going a little bit deeper. Um, so here is this thing. I was talking about the language, power of language, and most of the time we speak with ourselves. So you know that when we are alone, or even when we are not alone, even we are in a meeting, there is this voice in our head which is continuously telling something or the other. And if suppose something bad happens, the voice in the head is going to keep us telling the same thing again and again and again and again, and we'll keep on listening to that. Now, this is a very interesting thing in terms of we will not go and again and again, right? Whereas when it comes to our mind, our this inner roommate which sits inside our head and tells the same story again and again to us, which is bad, which is negative, it is boring, but we still listen to that. So how do we get ourselves free from that? I'll come to that later, but just recognizing this is very, very important. So many of us also talk to ourselves or that inner self, even loudly or verbally. A few of my few of the people whom I know, they do that when they're talking to themselves, they actually speak out loud and others can also hear. Not always, but sometimes. So you have an inner roommate, and being conscious of that is very, very important. And it's a great thing to do one exercise where one day you just spend watching your roommate. So that day you try to be aware of that when your mind starts speaking to yourself, what does your mind say? So sometimes and you will not imagine or you will not recognize it, but maybe a little bit later you will recognize. So doing this as an exercise just to be aware of what is your mind doing is a very, very powerful thing, especially for the next few things which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So once we start observing these thoughts, the interesting thing is that we sometimes don't realize that these are our thoughts. Now imagine you are watching a great movie by Steven Spielberg, and when such kind of dramatic moments are happening, you feel as if you are in that forest or whatever that moment is, and you exactly feel those experiences as if you are into it. But then after a while, you again come back and you realize that no, that's a movie. But for a few seconds or a few moments, we feel as if we are into it. That happens during our dreams as well, right? We don't realize that this is not reality. Now, the same thing happens in our thoughts, in the sense like when we feel extremely stressed. Now imagine this: when we say that we are stressed, are we stressed as an or are we experiencing stress? So understanding that I am not stressed but I am experiencing stress is very, very important. You don't look at the clouds and say I am clouds. You see the clouds, you experience the clouds, or there is a storm, you don't say I am storm. You say there is a storm going on. But when it comes to stress, we say we are stressed or I am stressed. No, you are not stressed, you are experiencing stress. And this is very, very important, to be aware that your emotions are not you. So having that awareness or having that practice to understand or to build this subject and object relationship between the thoughts and you, who is the thinker of the thoughts. So your thoughts are not you, you are the thinker of the thoughts. Now this may or may not look very simple, but this had been one of the most profound discoveries in my life. Of course, not a self discovery, I stole it from others, but this had been one of the most profound discoveries. And when I thought that, wow, this really is interesting. I mean, when I look at the clouds, I don't think I am the clouds, but when I look at my stress, I think I am stressed. So being aware that you are not your thoughts is a very, very powerful step. So the next part of, after you kind of realize that these emotions or this stress or whatever those negative things, you are not that, you are experiencing that, the next question is, how do I get free from that? How do I get free from this inner thorn or whatever that is? Now, there are many ways. Different school of psychology will talk about different solutions towards this. So this is a particular way of looking at it. It's not necessary that you have to follow this path, but there are many, many paths. But here is a very interesting path which made me very, very intrigued. Now, before we get into it, let me talk about a specific situation. Like, imagine you have a thorn, and the thorn touches some nerves and you feel extreme pain. Now, in order to get free from the thorn, you can decide, I'm going to put an apparatus to cover that so that when I'm walking around, it doesn't get touched. And then after a while, suppose you fall in love, and then you realize, no, I can't hug the person because I have this thorn. The moment I hug, I get hurt. Now you create another device on top of it and stuff like that. And at some point in time, you have created all these apparatus, all these mechanisms to lead a life with the thorn where it no longer disturbs you. Now the question is, if you achieve that, what have you achieved? Have you got freedom from the thorn? It may seem like, yes, I got free from the thorn, but if you look deeper, the thorn completely drives your life. It drives your behavior, it drives how you move, it drives what you wear, everything. So that way of freedom, of trying to put a patch or trying to protect, does not really give you that real freedom. So it is something like you have a vulnerability in the application and you just have a WAF. Now, having a WAF or a web application firewall, since this webinar largely has got security professionals, I'm giving an example of from cybersecurity. Having a control like web application firewall does not remove the vulnerability. The vulnerability is still there. So the question is, how do I remove the vulnerability? So in order to do that, I'll go back to Buddha, and Buddha was, as you all know, the enlightened person. And there's a very interesting story about the day before he becomes enlightened. So there's this demon called Mara who embodies all these negative feelings of greed and lust and all these things. So this demon tries to attack Buddha from getting attacks in order to stop him from getting enlightened. So Buddha fights that battle and he eventually wins and becomes enlightened. Now the interesting thing is, after getting enlightened, every now and then Mara comes back and tries to attack Buddha, and Buddha's friend Ananda, who sometimes tells that, you know what, there is Mara and Mara is trying to attack you. So the interesting thing which Buddha did was that every time he used to see Mara, the demon of all these negative emotions coming, he used to say, Mara, I can see you. And then he sometimes would visit Mara for a cup of tea with him. Now, what does this story signify? This significance or the meaning of this story is that even the person who is considered to be enlightened is not free from all these negative emotions, but the person is aware of the negative emotions, and the person is able to see and detect those negative emotions. Just like in cyber security, we know that it is not possible not to get attacked. We will get attacked. And that's the reason why we have a security operations center. So it is very important to have a holistic security program where you have a security operations center where you have a SIEM tool, you collect all the logs and you detect, and then you correlate, and then you act on it. So if you don't have the mechanism to detect, you can't have a holistic security program. So this observation of your mind, this observation of the negative things is like your security operations center. It's like the mind sock. And being aware of it and having the ability to detect it is really, really important. So whatever is the emotion that is coming, if you are able to detect it and be at peace with it, it's very important that you need to be at peace with it. And it's like the anger comes and you say, hey anger, come on, join the party. Sadness comes, you say, come on, join the party, and be at peace with all those emotions. And that's very, very important, to be centered. And when it comes to being centered, one interesting thing is, a lot of you know that it is told that Buddha spoke that life is suffering. Um, I can definitely say he did not say life is suffering, for a very simple reason. That is, Buddha did not know English. So he did not know the word suffering. So what he said was something else. What he said was life means, in the Sanskrit, or the language during that time, he also spoke Pali, uh, is dukkha. Now the word dukkha means, from the Aryans, they largely had, the Aryans used to um, largely do agriculture, and there were these bullock carts. So in bullock carts, if the axle, or the whole of the axle for the wheels, is not at the center, then what happens is you have a very bumpy ride if the wheel's axle does not pass exactly through the center. So dukkha means not being centered. So where uh, the hole is not in the center of the wheel, and if you are not centered, then you have a bumpy ride. So in a way, what he spoke about is, if you are not centered, if you are not able to be at the center and look at all these emotions and be at peace with it, you will have a bumpy ride. So he did not say life, he said life is a bumpy ride. So this is very, very important, where you are able to detect those negative emotions and you are at peace with it, where you can analyze it. So imagine this as a SOC, or a security operations center, which collects all these logs, correlates it, and observes it, and detects the bad things. So it's like your mind SOC. So this had been another idea which obviously I stole from a lot of places, but now I am a lot more, um, this idea is a lot more ingrained in me, which is understanding that things are transient. And I'll give you a few examples, or one example. I love traveling, so every time I visit some beautiful resort, generally in the nature, on the last day when I have to check out, suppose it is at 12 noon, in that morning, my mind is no longer, or my mind used to be in no longer in a peaceful or a calm state. I'm very, in a way, disturbed, or I'm not finding the right word, but definitely not in a state of joy or peace, thinking that the time is going to get over, and then talk to the guys and say, you know what, can you give a little bit of extra hours? Can I do a late check out, this, that, and all? So it's about, like, I'm in this wonderful place and I am not comfortable to let it go, because I want to hold on to that. It's so beautiful, it's so nice. And in that attempt to hold this, what I have done is I have lost those first 6 hours, or the last 6 hours at that place. So this particular intent to hold it, or to cling to it, made those last 6 hours not as much as joy as the previous days. So being at peace with this idea that everything is transient, good things are transient, bad things are transient, we don't need to cling to that, just enjoy it as it is very, very important. And finally, on mindfulness. So mindfulness is about being aware of your mind. This is what I was talking about in all these previous slides, in aware of your mind, your state of thoughts, what's happening, building that security operations center equivalent, or that SIEM equivalent for your mind. A lot of times people talk about mindfulness as being present. Now, mindfulness is definitely not equal to being present. I have a kid, and the kid is always in present. You give the kid a toy, the kid is happy now. You take away the toy, the kid is uh, immediately upset. You give something the kid loves to eat, the kid is happy. You give something which is not, which he doesn't like, he's unhappy. So he is always in the present. He's not thinking of, will I get a toy tomorrow? He probably is not even thinking of past. He's always in the present. But is he mindful? Definitely not. So mindfulness is that state of awareness, is that state of heightened awareness of your mind, of your body, where you are aware. And this awareness is not a fight to change. This awareness is purely from the perspective of awareness. So when you practice mindfulness as a mindfulness meditation, so you can practice mindfulness through meditation, but it's not necessary that you can only be mindful through meditation. But you can practice mindfulness through meditation. So when you do mindfulness meditation, what you essentially do is you just observe your mind, you observe every single part of your body, you observe your jaws, you observe your fingers. So when I started doing my first mindfulness meditation, I was absolutely amazed in terms of that my fingers and my legs, these are tight, my jaw is tight, my muscles are not relaxed. Once I started kind of observing each and every part of my muscles, it was like a new discovery of myself. So observing your mind and observing your body in that way. The second is observing your mind. When you observe like what's happening in your mind, that's what I was talking about in all these previous slides. So that's another part of mindfulness meditation. Now you can do mindfulness while sitting, you can do mindfulness while walking, you can be mindful as a way of life. It could be your way of life. But to achieve that ability to go to the gym to build muscle, similarly, which gym will you go to achieve this awareness or mindfulness? And that is meditation. So when you meditate um, using this school of thought of awareness, of mindfulness, you basically build your capability to be mindful. So that's your gym for the mind. Now there's another kind of meditation as well, where it's not necessarily about being mindful or trying to observe, which is about focusing. So in that school of meditation, you focus on an object or something specific. So I did not try that, or I'm not a big fan of that. I don't know all the good and bad sides of that. I myself had tried more of mindfulness. You can try both, and depending on which school you like more. And when you do mindfulness, the key idea is not to fight to change. So if you try to change, you basically give more power. So it is a little bit like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Um, if you try to tamper with something, or if you try to measure something too badly, you actually will lose the efficiency. So don't try to control that. Just observe that. That's the idea behind mindfulness.